We had a lovely breakfast and a good conversation between the Secretary General and the Prime Minister. We discussed quite a number of things related to NATO and Canada's contribution.
Did he ask you to increase defense spending?
No, we did talk about reaching our current commitment of 2% and the work that Canada has been doing over the past several months to accelerate our delivery. We also talked about some of the capabilities that Canada is delivering both in North America and particularly in our high Arctic. But also, we talked about the work that we're doing in Latvia as part of a larger coalition. Canada, as I'm sure you're aware, is leading the brigade in Latvia, and I think it's one of the most exceptional examples in all of Europe on how NATO can work really effectively together.
Minister, Donald Trump has repeatedly said that he wants Canada nuclear arms for speaking for state. He's talked about taking over Greenland. Do you think that this threat is real, and did that come up at your meeting?
No, but certainly we're concerned about those remarks, and I think overwhelmingly for all Canadians, those remarks are offensive. And we're proud of our country. And we've assured all of our allies we're prepared to stand up for our country. I do not believe that represents a real threat to us, but those remarks are disrespectful and concerning.
Donald Trump said recently that we don't invest much in our military, and he assumed that Canada, assuming that we don't put money into military because the United States is gonna attack us.
Well, then I would hope that the president will be briefed, for example, on how NORAD works. And for over 70 years, Canada and the United States have shared responsibility for continental defense through the NORAD arrangement. It is an incredibly effective alliance, and where we have worked together, and that Canada has already committed almost $38.6 billion to NORAD modernization, which we are doing very much in partnership with the United States. The NORAD commander is a four-star general, General Guillot, from the U.S. Air Force. But the second in command is a Canadian, a three-star general. That arrangement has helped keep the continent safe, and we're both making very significant investment. As a matter of fact, I'm looking forward to a conversation with my counterpart in the U.S. military to discuss the next steps in our very significant investment in over-the-horizon radar, which will give us domain awareness for the entire Eastern Arctic. That's something that Canada is taking a lead on. And I think it's a real contribution that Canada is making to our shared continental defense.
When are you having that meeting with your U.S. counterpart, and
Well,
when?
on the margins today, we've scheduled some time. It'll be my first opportunity to have a conversation with him. I was in Washington last week, but we knew that we were both going to be here at the Ukraine Defense Contact Group meeting, and then later on tomorrow at the NATO Defense Ministers meeting, and we will be having some of those conversations on the margin of that.
In that meeting, if he proposes or brings up the fact that the U.S. wants NATO spending to become 5% instead of 2%, what would your answer be?
Well, I think there's a discussion that will take place at NATO with respect to the appropriate level of defense spending. Right now, I'm focused on meeting the commitment that we've already made. We're working really hard to accelerate our spending to get to the 2% threshold that Canada has committed to. And I believe that is achievable, and we're making very, very significant progress, and I'll share that with our allies. And then there is another conversation that will take place among all the members of the NATO alliance as to what the next level of investment might be required, given the changing circumstances and, frankly, the changing approach the United States is taking to NATO.
Would your government ever consider spending 5% of GDP on defense? And what do you think that Trump's really after when he makes that point?
Well, again, I would point out, even the United States does not spend 5% of their GDP on defense, and the United States is a superpower. And they are able to project their power and authority around the world. For many of the NATO allies, including Canada, our responsibility is, first of all, the defense of our own country and our own continent, but also living up to our obligations to the alliance in NATO, in NORAD, and in our arrangements in the Indo-Pacific. And so the appropriate level of spending to fulfill those obligations, I think, is a matter for discussion that will take place around the NATO table. I'm looking forward to it.
If Canada was attacked in any kind of way, is it the Canadian government's assumption that the Americans would have out and defend Canada?
We are signatories to the NATO alliance, and all NATO countries have agreed to defend each other in the event of attack. The only time Article 5 has actually ever been invoked was at 9/11, when the United States was attacked and thousands of their citizens were killed. Canada responded to that call to assist the United States. We deployed over 40,000 of our troops in Afghanistan. Over 150 of our people lost their lives and thousands were injured. We answered the call, and our expectation is, should our country ever be attacked, any NATO member being attacked, we will all be there for each other.
But
Are
the
you
president,
worried about Trump leaving NATO? Are you worried about Trump leaving NATO?
No, I think NATO has over time evolved. We've seen actually remarkable growth of NATO just in the past few years, particularly with the advent of both Finland and Sweden coming into the NATO alliance. That's very important to Canada because as an Arctic nation, having more members who are also Nordic and Arctic nations, I think strengthens our collective ability to defend the Arctic in a far more collective and effective way. And so it is an organization that continues to evolve. I think there are important, robust discussions that will take place around the NATO table, and I think under the leadership of Secretary General Rutte, I think we're very well positioned to have the conversations about the next evolution and developments for NATO.
When Trump talks about that 5% of defense spending, saying he might pull out of NATO if European countries, for example, and others aren't paying their bills, what do you think he's after? What's his game?
Well, again, I don't want to speculate, and I think I tend to take people at their word. And when he says what he's concerned about, I think then it is our responsibility to respond to his concerns. And for example, just recently, the President of the United States expressed concern about the policing of our border. And he talked about his concerns about illegal migration and fentanyl. We listened very carefully to his concerns and we responded appropriately as a good neighbor does. And we're very hopeful that he'll see not just our good intentions, but the hard work that we're doing to respond to his concerns. I think a similar discussion will take place at NATO. It's important for all of the NATO members to have frank discussions, and I'm looking forward to those discussions that take place around that table.
So if you're taking him at his word, then you must believe that what he's talking about at the 51st state is a legitimate goal of Mr. Trump.
Well, and again, I don't accept that. Canada is a sovereign nation, a proud and sovereign nation, and one of the things I think we need to be very clear to everyone, including Mr. Trump, is that Canadians we will always stand up for our nation, our country, and we are not vulnerable to anybody's ambitions with respect to our territory and our sovereignty. We're prepared to defend ourselves as required, and that always sometimes requires sacrifice, and I believe Canadians understand that requirement. But we've also, I think we have been a good ally, a good friend to the United States. We have fought side by side with him through a number of world wars and through conflicts around the world, and when they called and needed our help, we were there for them. I think we need to make sure that America remembers that relationship and how important it is to the prosperity of both of our countries and the security of both of our countries.
You don't believe that this threat is real, but the Prime Minister does.
No, listen, I'm concerned about what the President has said. I think all Canadians are concerned about what the President has said, but all Canadians are, I believe, increasingly united in their resolve to defend our country, to stand up for our country. For our fellow Canadians, we're proud of our nation, and we are prepared to defend it. And so the remarks that the President has made, I think need to be strongly and clearly refuted. That is not acceptable to us. We've earned that right as a nation to be very clear to anyone who would threaten our security and our nation that Canada is prepared to defend itself.
Are you that NATO allies will defend Canada if Trump makes good on his threat?
You know, I will tell you, in all the years that we have been a member of NATO, when we were among the very first signatories to that arrangement, Canada is never a country that has ever had to ask for help or been threatened by our alliances. That's not really the relationship that Canada has with the nations of the world. But we've been there for others, and every time, throughout our history, every time our allies and our friends needed us, we were there. And we will remind them of that, and we will also remind them that we'll continue to be there for them. I do not believe that Canada is being sincerely threatened by anyone today. But when people covet our country, our resources, Canadians are prepared to stand up and take a very strong stand in defense of who we are and our country.
So are you going to take a strong stand then today when you talk to the U.S. Defense Secretary on this front? What's your message?
Well, I think our message, and it's not just my message, it's the message of all Canadians. Canadians have said very clearly, we're proud of our country, we're prepared to defend our country and stand up for our country. We also know that in the threat of economic sanctions and tariffs against our country and others, that is not good for anyone. It won't be good for the Canadian economy and Canadian workers, but it also won't be good for the American economy and Canadian workers. Free trade has led to a far more prosperous environment for both of our countries. We need to make sure that we communicate that, but we also need to be equally clear that if we are compelled to respond to economic sanctions that may be imposed upon us, that we are prepared to do what is required to defend our national interests.
Are you open to spending more than 2% of GDP? You've mentioned that NATO's going to be talking about this soon.
I'm working really hard, Ashley, to get us to 2%. There will be other discussions as to what may be required beyond that in the future, but right now, myself, the Department of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces are focused entirely on meeting that obligation as quickly as it can be done. Thank you all very much.